Bob Dylan kept her name secret for 60 years. He wrote his most celebrated songs about her. He walked away from the peak of his fame after she left. He crashed a motorcycle 2 years later, disappeared for 8 years, and when he finally came back, he came back as a different person entirely. The people closest to him spent decades saying the motorcycle crash explained the change. It did not explain the change. At 83, Bob Dylan has finally said what the crash was covering for. Her name was Suze Rotolo. She was 20 years old when they met in 1961. She was 23 when she left him in 1964. And the 3 years between those two dates produced more essential American music than most artists generate in a lifetime, because grief and longing focused through the mind of a specific genius does not stay in the chest. It goes into the work. It goes into Masters of War and Blowin' in the Wind and Don't Think Twice It's Alright and A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall and It Ain't Me Babe. She left. The song stayed. He never stopped writing about the thing she had opened in him, and he never fully found it again in anyone else. Robert Allen Zimmerman was born on May 24, 1941 in Duluth, Minnesota, the first son of Abram and Beatrice Zimmerman, a Jewish family with roots stretching back to Ukraine and Lithuania. Abram contracted polio when Bob was 6. The family relocated to Hibbing, a mining town in the Iron Range where Beatrice had grown up, where the economy was organized around ore extraction, and the winters were the kind of cold that stops conversation. He was a quiet child, prone to asthma, with an internal world considerably larger than the one Hibbing offered to look at. His family owned local movie theaters, which gave him more access to American popular culture than the average Hibbing child, and he absorbed it with the appetite of someone who understands early that his material is not going to come from the place he is currently standing. The music hit him at 10. Elvis Presley and Hank Williams arriving simultaneously through a transistor radio, which is about the most useful combination of influences a future American songwriter could receive. Elvis for the sexuality and the rebellion and the understanding that the body is part of the instrument. Williams for the plainness and the pain, for the way a true voice carries the weight of a life without ornamentation and makes the plainness itself the art. He taught himself piano by ear first, switched to guitar at 14, formed a band called the Golden Chords that played loud, fast rock and roll at a school talent show with sufficient volume that the principal reportedly cut the microphone, a story that may have been embellished in the retelling, but that captured something accurate about the direction he was moving. His high school yearbook listed his ambition as joining Little Richard. He was not joking. He enrolled at the University of Minnesota in 1959 and lasted 1 semester before the folk music scene in Dinkytown, the neighborhood surrounding the campus, made academic obligation feel like an imposition. He moved into a small apartment above a drugstore and began playing coffee houses for whatever they would pay him, which was very little, and getting fired from some of those for asking for more, which he did anyway. He picked up a copy of Woody Guthrie's autobiography, Bound for Glory, and it reorganized everything. He put down the electric guitar, picked up an acoustic, and began writing songs that sounded like folk and protest and the American road rather than rock and roll. He had found the form that fitted what was inside him. In January 1961, at 19, he stepped off a bus in New York City in the middle of a brutal winter with a guitar, a suitcase, and the single intention of meeting Woody Guthrie, who was dying of Huntington's disease in a hospital in New Jersey and who was barely able to speak. Dylan made the trip anyway. He sat in the hospital room and sang for the man who had built the template he was going to rebuild. Guthrie handed him a note. It said, "I ain't dead yet." Dylan went home and wrote Song to Woody and put it on his first album. Columbia Records signed him in October 1961. The deal was negotiated by producer John Hammond, who had previously signed Billie Holiday and Aretha Franklin, and who recognized in Dylan something that most of the label regarded as an expensive mistake. They called him Hammond's Folly. The first album cost $42 to record across 3 afternoons and sold approximately 5,000 copies in its first year. Dylan was not discouraged by this, or was not visibly discouraged, which may have amounted to the same thing. He had already met Suze Rotolo. She was 20 years old. She was beautiful in a specific, serious European way that had nothing to do with glamour. Her parents had been members of the Communist Party and had raised her in an atmosphere of political engagement and intellectual seriousness that was entirely unlike anything in Hibbing, Minnesota, or even in the folk scene Dylan had entered. She had grown up around protest and activism and the specific earnestness of people who believe that art and politics are not separate categories. She introduced him to Brecht. She introduced him to the Italian cinema. She introduced him to the idea that a song could be an argument rather than just an emotion. They were together by early 1962. They moved into a small apartment on West 4th Street in Greenwich Village and built the life that young people in New York in 1962 built. When they were serious and broke and convinced that what they were doing mattered. Small, cold apartments, cheap food, borrowed warmth, the specific electric poverty of the genuinely ambitious. On the cover of the Freewheelin', Bob Dylan released in 1963, they are walking down Jones Street in the Village in the February cold. Suze tucked into his arm, both of them leaning slightly into the wind. It is one of the most reproduced images in the history of American music, and what it captures is not a publicity photograph. It is two people who are genuinely in love, photographed by someone who knew what they were looking at. The songs that came out of those years were not love songs in any conventional sense. They were the songs of someone whose political conscience and personal feeling had been fused together by proximity to a woman who refused to keep them separate. Blowin' in the Wind, Masters of War, The Death of Emmett Till, A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. The Freewheelin'. Bob Dylan was released when he was 21 years old, and it remains 60 years later. One of the most astonishing debut statements any artist has ever made. The pressure was building inside the relationship at the same speed the fame was building outside it. Dylan was becoming famous faster than either of them had fully prepared for. The folk community in Greenwich Village had adopted him as its central figure, which meant that his opinions and his movements and his associations were all subject to the kind of scrutiny that changes the quality of a private life irreversibly. Suze spent a year in Italy in 1962 studying art restoration in Perugia. The separation produced Boots of Spanish Leather, a song about a woman departing by ship who does not know what she wants to bring back. A song whose emotional precision is the precision of a man who was told something vague and understood it completely. When she returned, the relationship resumed. When it ended in 1964, it ended because fame had done what fame does to the people inside the space it consumes, which is to make every ordinary interaction into something that requires negotiation. Dylan responded to the end of the relationship by writing, "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right," a song whose casual cruelty and genuine heartbreak occupy the same melody, which is the most accurate musical description of how it feels when something ends that you did not want to end but cannot stop. He also responded by changing, not suddenly. Across the next 2 years, the acoustic folk singer who had written Masters of War began moving toward the electric sound that would produce Like a Rolling Stone and Highway 61. Revisited and Blonde on Blonde, a creative eruption so sustained and so total that the people watching it at close range described the feeling of being in proximity to something they could not track. In July 1966, he crashed a motorcycle near Woodstock, New York. The details of the accident have never been fully established. The injuries he sustained have never been fully documented. He withdrew from public life for 8 years. The official explanation was the crash. The less official explanation, assembled from what people who were close to him said across the decades since, was that the crash was a convenient exit from an existence that had become unsustainable at the velocity it was traveling. He married Sarah Lowndes in November 1965 quietly and without announcement. They had 4 children together, and he adopted her daughter from a previous marriage. He lived in Woodstock as a family man, chopped wood, Walked dogs made music in the basement of a house called Big Pink with the musicians who would become the band, and declined to be this prophet that a generation of people who had not survived the 1960s without assistance were insisting he be. Blood on the Tracks arrived in 1975, a decade after Suze had left and 6 years after he had married Sarah. The album is the most debated autobiographical artifact in American popular music. Dylan has consistently denied that it is about his marriage to Sarah. His son Jacob has said it is definitely about his parents. The songs themselves do not fully support either interpretation and do not require one. They are about a love that ended and the specific, protracted, never quite finished grief that follows a love that mattered. Sarah filed for divorce in 1977. The proceedings were contentious. She received half of everything, including rights to a significant portion of the songs written during the marriage. As part of the settlement, she agreed not to speak publicly about their life together. She has kept that agreement completely. She has never given an interview about Bob Dylan. He married again in secret in 1986. Carolyn Dennis was a backup singer in his touring band. They had a daughter, Desiree, and concealed the marriage using a law that permitted sealing the marriage certificate. The birth certificate did not list Dylan as the father. The marriage lasted 6 years and was not publicly known until a biography revealed it in 2001. Carolyn has said they did it to protect their daughter's childhood, and the explanation is sufficient without being complete. His career through the 1980s was the career of a man who could not find his footing and kept working anyway because the alternative was stopping. Knocked Out, loaded in 1986, was dismissed as rushed and incoherent. Down in the Groove in 1988 sold poorly and was later described, including by Dylan himself, in unguarded moments as a record made without sufficient reason. The critical standing he had accumulated across the 1960s and 1970s was not entirely depleted, but was being drawn down in ways that people who cared about his legacy found uncomfortable to watch. Then, in 1997 came Time Out of Mind, an album recorded after a heart infection that had nearly killed him, suffused with mortality and regret, and the specific sound of a man who has come back from somewhere and is reporting on what the view looks like from there. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year. It was followed by Love and Theft in 2001, Modern Times in 2006, and Tempest in 2012. Each album demonstrating that the creative engine was not depleted, but was operating from a different place, quieter, more interior, less interested in the audience's reaction than in the work's fidelity to what it was trying to say. He published Chronicles Volume 1 in 2004, a memoir so deliberately selective and yet so genuinely illuminating about the nature of artistic formation that it stood as one of the best books about being a musician that had ever been written. Suze appears in it, not prominently, but with the specific weight of someone whose presence the author has decided to acknowledge without fully accounting for, which is its own kind of acknowledgement. He converted to Christianity in 1979 following a concert in San Diego where someone threw a small silver cross onto the stage. He picked it up. The following night in a hotel room in Tucson, he said he felt Jesus physically present in the room with him. He was baptized. He released 3 albums of gospel music. He preached from the stage between songs. His audience was baffled and then hostile, and he continued anyway, with the specific stubbornness of a man who has decided what he believes and finds the audience's comfort irrelevant to the decision. By 1983, the religious phase was receding. He worked with Mark Knopfler on Infidels, an album that moved back toward more familiar territory while retaining the theological seriousness of the born-again period. In 1988, he joined the Traveling Wilburys with George Harrison, Tom Petty, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne, 5 musicians who had each reached the specific altitude where collaboration becomes possible because competition has become irrelevant. The never-ending tour began in 1988 and has essentially continued since. He has played more than 3,000 shows across 35 years and what his fans and his critics have each interpreted differently. His fans see it as a commitment to the work that transcends commercial obligation. His critics see it as a man who cannot stop moving, who needs the road because the alternatives are worse. Both interpretations are probably true in proportion. In 2016, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. He did not attend the ceremony. He sent Patti Smith to perform in his place. He delivered his lecture remotely several weeks after the deadline, which was classic Dylan behavior rendered on the largest possible stage. The lecture itself, when it came, was one of the finest pieces of writing about the nature of artistic influence and the relationship between music and literature that any Nobel laureate has ever produced. Suze Rotolo died on February 24, 2011. She was 67 years old, killed by lung cancer. She had built a life after Dylan that was genuinely hers. She became a visual artist of real accomplishment, illustrated children's books, taught made things. She published a memoir in 2008 called A Free Wheel in Time that described her years with Dylan with a clarity and fairness that was, given the circumstances, remarkable. Dylan said nothing publicly when she died. He was on tour. He played a show 2 days later and did not acknowledge it from the stage. 3 weeks after her death, he played Oxford, Mississippi, and closed the set with the song he had written for her, Don't Think Twice It's All Right, which he had not performed in years. He played it once and did not play it again. At 83, what Bob Dylan has finally said is what the songs have been saying for 60 years, that the woman who opened him to what music could mean was Suze Rotolo, that the 3 years they spent together in Greenwich Village produced the best work of his career, not because of the village, or because of the political moment, or because of the folk scene, or because of anything external, but because of her specifically. Because she was someone who refused to let him separate the personal from the political, the beautiful from the serious, the feeling from the argument. He wrote her name in every song he ever made about love and loss. He kept the name off the byline for 60 years. At 83, in the specific quiet of a man who has survived nearly everyone who made him who he has stopped keeping it. She was the love of his life. He has been saying so in code since 1963. He has finally said it plainly in the only language he has ever fully trusted, his own. The Nobel lecture confirmed what the 60 years of songs had been demonstrating. He is not a man who separates the personal from the artistic, the private feeling from the public expression. He processes what happens to him by turning it into work, and the work then exists permanently in a way the feeling cannot, outlasting the people who produced it and the circumstances that generated it. Suze Rotolo died in 2011. The songs she helped produce are still being played. The cover of Freewheelin', the two of them walking into the February wind, is still on walls in apartments in cities she never visited, and the Dylan has long since stopped visiting. The image belongs to everyone now. What it was made of belonged only to them.